Customers like the practicality of small MPV people carriers, but sales in this category are falling because small SUVs are more charismatic. So, what if you could produce a little MPV with the charisma of a little SUV? That's the thinking behind Fiat's much improved 500L.
Fiat has its own Fortune 500, a little family of cars on which present and future hopes of the brands are these days almost exclusively based. The 500 we all think of is a cheeky little three-door city car that started this model's retro revolution back in 2008, but Fiat always felt that this should be merely the starting rung on an ownership ladder designed to be fine for families as well as fashion-conscious urbanistas. A ladder encompassing 7 seats and SUV styling, both of which are available with this model, a revised and considerably enhanced version of the spacious 500L small MPV. Fiat's fame, of course, has traditionally been founded on much smaller cars than this, but the brand has long known that it needs to get better at being bigger if legions of owners of the 500 city car are not going to be lost to other makers as their needs and their families grow. Hence the introduction of the original version of this 500L back in 2012, when it claimed to be the most space-efficient and personalisable design in the small MPV segment. A lot has changed since then though, with small SUVs like Fiat's own 500X now usually preferred to little people carriers like this. So, is there still a place in the changing market for the 500L? Well, Fiat thinks there is. To prove the point, the Italian brand thoroughly updated this car in mid-2017, changing 40% of all its components and in the process creating the much improved model that we're going to look at here. The previously rather awkward looks now have more in common with the 500 city car. Media connectivity has taken a step forward and the cabin is of much higher quality. Just as importantly, this model now has 3 distinct identities: the standard urban version, the lengthened 7-seat wagon model, and this more rugged-looking cross variant with its higher ride height and enhanced traction system. Lots of options then for a compact people carrier that aims to bring a welcome dash of fashion to family motoring. A car that Fiat says you can be passionately practical about. Let's check it out. Potential 500L owners will come to this Fiat knowing it to be a more grown-up car than its city car stablemate. They'll know that it won't be quite the same to drive, but that won't stop some of them being slightly disappointed when that turns out to be true behind the wheel. Little of the responsive terrier-like handling that marks out a standard little 500 has made it here, except perhaps the light steering that marks that little tiller out. And you can still make it lighter still for urban manoeuvring by pressing this useful little city button on the dash. This, in combination with great all-round visibility that's aided by the high upright driving position, makes this 500L very much in its element around town. You really notice how much easier this car is to see out of when you're at junctions, helped by a clever A-pillar front quarter-light design offering the same kind of curved windscreen look that characterised this car's spiritual predecessor, the Multipla model of the 1950s. It all adds to urban confidence that's only marred by ride quality. That's a bit on the firm side, although it rarely gets uncomfortable. This, in short, is a car you might enjoy on the school run. Beyond the city limits, though, the 500L feels much less assured. Here, you might wish that the steering offered you a little more feedback and that there was a bit less body roll through the bends too. That probably won't bother most likely owners too much, but on longer trips, they might well wish that the issue of refinement had been slightly more thoroughly addressed. Now, we highlighted this when we first tested this car back in 2012, and nothing's been done to improve things as part of this midterm update, which is a touch disappointing. It isn't something you really notice at lower speeds, but when you're pushing on or cruising at or around the legal limit on the highway, there's simply more road and wind noise than you would expect normally from a car of this kind. The engines aren't especially quiet either, although the diesel units that most buyers will select do offer reasonably willing slugs of pulling power, especially the top 120 bhp 1.6 litre multi-jet unit that we're trying here. This variant has 320 newton meters of grunt. It's enough to pull along a 1.1 tonne braked trailer and sufficient to see 62 miles an hour pass in 11.5 seconds en route to 114 miles an hour. The alternative 95 bhp 1.3 litre multi-jet diesel is going to feel somewhat feeble after that, with around 30% less torque to put through its front wheels. Here, 62 miles an hour from rest occupies 14.3 seconds en route to a top speed that just scrapes over the 100 miles an hour mark. That's if you go for the manual model. This 1.3 litre diesel is the only one in the range that can be mated to automatic transmission, and that's Fiat's rather jerky dual logic unit. We tried to stick to the ordinary, if rather notchy, 6-speed stick shifter if at all possible. The two minority interest petrol options offer either 95 or 120 bhp too. Now, we counsel you to try and avoid the base 1.4 litre power plant. It's one of Fiat's older efforts, and thanks to even more limited pulling power, it doesn't even feel as fast as its modest official performance stats suggest. Rest to 62 miles an hour in 12.8 seconds on its way to 106 miles an hour. Better is the 120 bhp 1.4 litre T-Jet unit. Here you get much of the useful in-gear pulling power of the diesels without their gruff, rumbly accompaniment, and 62 mph is quickly dispatched in 10.2 seconds on the way to 117 miles an hour. For most buyers, though, the limited levels of running cost efficiency will put pay to that variant's chances. Now, as you might have noticed from the pictures, the 500L that we're trying here has been dressed rather adventurously. It's the top-spec cross version that Fiat hopes will appeal to folk who ideally would want a small SUV but actually need the greater interior flexibility of a small people carrier. Now, we'd expected the package of changes that were delivered to set this variant apart to be primarily cosmetic, so it was really quite refreshing to find a degree of off-road substance to be also part of this ritziest 500L model's repertoire. The key improvement for cross models is the addition of this little extra dial at the bottom of the centre stack. It's a mode selector that on a slippery surface at speeds of under 18 miles an hour allows you to choose a special Traction Plus setting which can sense which of the front wheels has less grip. Having determined that, the setup software prompts the ABS system to brake the slipping wheel at the same time as transferring torque to the one with more traction and hopefully easing you out of whatever mildly challenging situation you're slithering around in. It's not, of course, intended to make this car into any sort of off-roader, but in combination with a 25mm ride height increase, it will be enough to make light, muddy field tracks passable. Should those tracks contain slopes, the mode selector has a further, rather dramatically titled gravity control option. That's basically a hill descent control system that automatically lightly brakes the car at low speeds to ease you down slippery slopes. Overall, you wouldn't want to put all this to too much of a test, but the truth is that there's probably more off-tarmac capability here than you get with most fashionable small SUVs. We rather think, though, that the take-up on this cross variant will be somewhat slight. If you want a small SUV with a Fiat badge, the Italian brand always makes a very acceptable one in the form of its cute and rather more stylish 500X model. Plus, with that car, you can also specify four-wheel drive if you want it. This 500L campaigns with more practical virtues. Not everyone will like the styling approach that's necessary to achieve these, but it's surely one that sets it apart from its rivals. It's a unique look, just as every 500 ought to have. You tend to approach this 500L expecting it to be a pumped-up version of the 500 city car, which of course it isn't. To make this model as big as it needed to be, fully 60 centimetres longer and 18 centimetres taller than an ordinary 500, Andreas Wuppinger's styling team had to use a Punto Super Mini floor plan as a basis for something quite different, and then give the end result a recognisable 500-style twist, hence the familiar wide-eyed front end. As BMW found when trying to supersize the Mini to create the Mini Countryman, that isn't a recipe for aesthetic elegance, and it certainly isn't here, but it has left room for some very clever touches. Just look at the flow of this wraparound windscreen, for instance, designed to give almost 360-degree vision. And instead of the usual 2 front A-pillars, here we have 4, giving a continuous wraparound effect that not only looks good, but also improves front visibility and crash protection. As for the changes made to this revised model, well, they've mainly been about creating more of a visual family connection between this car and the 500 city runabout that Fiat hopes many potential buyers will be graduating to it from. These uniquely illuminated mid-level daytime running lights are, for example, borrowed from the most recently improved version of that smaller car. Most of the family resemblance, though, is tied up in what the brand calls a moustache and badge combo, and that's something that they hope you'll see in the way that this chromed strip and the upper grille just beneath it sit between the 2 main headlights. Now, the effect of this is a bit more prominent now that the designers have given the lower frontal area a bit more emphasis, courtesy of a revised front bumper. Our ordinary variants get it incorporated with a chrome-studded 3-dimensional lower grille, but for this SUV-styled cross version, there's a more aggressive silvered skid plate style arrangement, and there's also special venter treatment for the upper grille. As with the 500L itself, it's something you'll either like a lot or not at all. In profile, this 500L has been far less successful than its 500X SUV showroom stablemate in carrying over that cute 500 model family look and feel. Perhaps that's unfair. A 500X, after all, doesn't have to be practical and boxy in the way that the 500L does. You'd have hoped that the stylist might have been able to make the squarical shape a little prettier than this, though. Go for the bigger 7-seat wagon version, which is lengthened by 228mm, and the profile looks even more curious. Still, if you like being different, either body style might appeal, in which case you'll probably also like the fact that there is the option of specifying the roof in either white or, as in this case, a matte black finish, which works with the similarly coloured A, B and C pillars to create a very effective floating effect. Changes to this revised model are restricted to restyled side rubbing strips and smarter wheel designs that vary between 15, 16 or, as in this case, 17 inches in size. Now at the back, 2 main changes have been made to this revised model. First, the addition of these silvered panel strips below the tail lamps, either side of the hatch opening, and second, the relocation of the fog and reversing lights to a lower position on the underside of the bumper, which in this case, the case of this cross variant, has been silver coloured to give it a rather unconvincing skid plate style demeanour. Otherwise it's as you were, which means you still get one of the biggest model name badges that you'll ever see shouting its credentials from the middle of the tailgate panel. Time to move inside, where quite a few changes have been made to try to lift the rather limited showroom appeal that afflicted the cabin of the original version of this car. Now, that awful dished steering wheel of the original model has been replaced by this much smarter circular bezeled item, and through it you view a completely revamped instrument cluster with 2 round gauges either side of a neat 3.5-inch colour graphic display. Depending on preferences that you can select via steering wheel buttons, this middle segment can brief you on route information, phone settings, audio selections, service intervals and trip computer readouts, but you're most likely to leave it simply displaying a digital speedo. Perhaps the most significant cabin improvement, though, lies here in the centre of the fascia with the addition of this next generation Uconnect infotainment system. Avoid entry-level trim and you get this large 7-inch colour touchscreen that now incorporates Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, smartphone mirroring, media connectivity. The Uconnect setup includes voice recognition, a DAB tuner, Bluetooth connectivity, text readout and audio streaming. Plus, there's also a downloadable Uconnect Live app available that will allow you to update your Facebook page and your Twitter feed, while also accessing music streaming with Deezer and TuneIn, news from Reuters, and connected navigation with TomTom Live if you don't want to have to pay extra for the more conventional built-in TomTom navigation upgrade package that we have here. Another extra added in here is the thumping 520-watt 8-channel Beats audio system. Another change that owners of the original version of this car might notice lies in the higher positioning of the restyled gear stick. Now features an upper knob that's rather overly stout. In controlling it, you're able to rest your elbow on this newly added optional central armrest, and that covers a useful storage area. That's one of 22 such storage points all dotted around the cabin. Unusually, there are 2 glove boxes, which is useful, although it would have been nice if the lower, larger one could have copied some rivals in incorporating an air conditioning feed to help keep snacks and drinks cool. The door pockets are too narrow for a large drinks bottle, and there's no overhead compartment for your sunglasses. You do, though, get a deep bin in front of the gear stick, which is obviously intended for your phone, hence the nearby aux-in and USB ports provided just above. Plus, there are 2 cup holders down by the handbrake and coin recesses by the door pulls. The seating position is high and quite upright, but that does at least enhance all-round visibility, and that's aided by tall windows and thin pillars on all sides. You'll be glad of that on entry-level variants, which have to do without rear parking sensors. The seats are quite comfortable too, although unfortunately you do have to pay extra to get them kitted out with lumbar adjustment. Though this cabin has hardly anything in common with that of a 500 city car, Fiat doesn't want you to forget the family bloodline, so there is prominent 500 badging on the glove box there, on the seat backs and on the gearshift plinth. What else? Well, the ambience of cabin quality, although it is improved, still isn't a match for that of most rivals. Still, the chunky switchgear, these fat circular ventilation controls, for example, has its charm. And on this top version, the faux leather seat edging trim looks quite smart. Avoid entry-level spec and you'll be able to specify the main fascia finishing in either black or grey. Time to take a seat in the rear, which is where, in theory at least, you ought to notice that this 500L is one of the longer Super Mini-based MPVs in its segment. It's 70mm lengthier, for example, than a rival Ford B-Max. The doors open nice and wide, which is a good start. Once inside, you'll find a rear cabin that, sure enough, really does feel quite spacious by class standards, mainly because it offers more headroom than any other model in this part of the MPV segment. Or at least it does in the form that we're trying here. Top-spec lounge variants get a big 1.5 square metre panoramic glass roof as standard, which lets in a lot of light, but which massively restricts headroom, so try before you buy that. Width-wise, 3 adults would more comfortably fit here than would be the case with obvious rivals, and that's aided by the relatively low positioning of this central transmission tunnel. Legroom's good too, and it can be even better if you play around with the standard sliding rear bench, which can be slid separately with a 60-40 split. Further nice touches include big door pockets, a central USB port, netted seat backs, and the option of adding in these useful seat back tables. These include cup recesses, which you might need because the tiny fold-down centre armrest only offers a single cup holder. In this case, as you've seen, we're trying the 5-seat version of this car. The lengthier wagon model extends its rear overhang by enough to allow the installation of a 3rd seating row, although, as you might expect, the 2 extra pews on offer are only really intended for young children. Finally, let's take a look in the boot. An MPV like this one that's based on Super Mini underpinnings is of course never going to be able to offer the size of cargo area that you get in a much pricier family hatch-based Scenic or C-Max sector 5-seat people carrier. Still, within the confines of the class, this 500L does pretty well with 400 litres of capacity on offer. True, that's not enough to equal what's on offer from category contenders like Kia's Venga or Hyundai's iX20, but it does match what you get in a slightly bigger Vauxhall Meriva, and it beats the trunk capacity of a Ford B-Max by a useful 82-litre margin. For reference, there's also more room back here than you get in most Focus-sized family hatchbacks. It's a very usable space too, thanks to the standard so-called cargo magic space adjustable height boot floor that you'll get, providing you avoid entry-level trim. Now, as with most setups of this type, the idea is that you can take it out if you have taller things to carry, say a garden centre plant for example, or slot it into a raised position which will create a usefully sized lower space, ideal for more valuable items you might want to shield away from prying eyes. The room on offer is sufficient for up to 5 suitcases, and it can easily accommodate a full-size pushchair, although you'll have to not mind lumping all those items over this rather high loading lip. In the 7-seat wagon variant, you will of course have hardly any luggage room at all when all the chairs are upright, just 168 litres of space. A couple of bag hooks are provided, and there are useful extra corner compartments on either side, the right one incorporating a netted area for small items. You don't though get either a 12-volt socket or a ski hatch for longer baggage. If you need more room, folding down the rear seat backs frees up a 1,310 litre capacity in this 5-seat variant, or up to 1,509 litres in the wagon model. If that's still not enough, then folding the front passenger seat will enable you to transport objects of up to 2.4 metres in length. Small wonder then that this car boasts up to 1,500 potential seating and loading configurations. That's enough to suit the vast majority of likely people and packaging permutations. And if you can't fit it all inside, then roof bars can be installed for carrying bikes, surfboards, skis and snowboards. This improved 500L comes with 3 distinct personalities to suit 3 different kinds of buyer. The range starting point is a standard 5-seat urban version, priced in the £16,500 to £21,000 bracket. From there you have the option of 2 further body style derivatives, respectively prioritising either practicality or fashion. Practical folk may be drawn to find the £1,500 premium to get themselves the alternative 7-seat wagon derivative. Fashionistas, meanwhile, are more likely to want to find the £2,000 premium to get themselves the SUV style cross variant that we're trying here. Now, this cross model comes in one single fully loaded level of spec, but if you go for either the urban or the wagon variants, you'll be offered the choice of either base pop star trim or, for £1,500 more, a plusher lounge version. Got that? Okay, let's move on to what's available beneath the bonnet here. Now, the range is based around either 95 bhp or 120 bhp petrol or diesel engine options. At the budget end of the lineup, the 95 bhp 1.4 litre petrol unit really is quite feeble, so much so in fact that it can't even be offered with a larger wagon body style, which means that if you can afford it, the £2,125 premium necessary to move from the base unit into the 95 bhp 1.3 litre multi-jet diesel will be money well spent. Now, that 1.3 litre diesel is the only engine in the range that can be mated with automatic transmission. That's a dual logic setup costing a further £1,000. If you'd prefer to look at one of the 120 bhp models, the 1.4 litre T-Jet petrol engine is a willing but relatively inefficient power plant, so the £1,875 premium that's necessary instead to go with the alternative, identically powerful 1.6 litre multi-jet diesel we're trying here might look quite tempting. By that point, though, you could easily be spending £20,000 or more. Enough on the range. What about the value proposition? Well, before getting into how this 500L sizes up against rivals from other brands, we really ought to give you a Fiat range perspective here. Now, comparing this relatively spacious 500L to its tiny city car originator wouldn't normally be very relevant, but since Fiat's trying to get buyers to graduate from one car to the other, we'll tell you that with the one engine that the two models share, the 1.3 litre diesel, there is a premium of just over £3,000 to go from a 500 to a 500L with a similar level of spec. Probably a more sensible comparison, though, can be made between the 500L and its alternative small SUV showroom stablemate, the 500X. For an X, you'll be paying a premium of just under £1,000 over an L, so your call. Now, this whole decision between MPV and SUV will colour your perspective when it comes to considering rivals to this car from other brands. Now, this is fundamentally a contender within the smallest breed of MPV people carriers, and we're going to primarily consider it from that perspective. Now, for relevant rivals, don't look to family hatch-based MPVs like Renault Scenic, Citroën C4 Picasso or Ford C-Max. They're larger and significantly more expensive. More relevant rivals lie with slightly smaller Super Mini-based people carriers like Ford's B-Max, Vauxhall's Meriva, Kia's Venga and Hyundai's iX20. The Ford and the Vauxhall are priced very comparably to this Fiat. The Kia and the Hyundai could save you between £1,500 and £3,000, depending on the variant you're looking at, but the engines on offer aren't as efficient. It's perhaps more relevant to point out that none of the rivals just mentioned has the visual charisma of a 500L, and none of them can be personalised in the same way as is possible with this Fiat. Now, that will matter to a lot of buyers. The ability to be able to specify 7 seats is also unique to this Italian brand if you're looking at an MPV with a Super Mini-based platform. Now, that's important because it means that if you want a family car with 3 seating rows for well under £20,000 and you don't want a converted van, a 500L wagon will be just about your only option. Here, as we mentioned, we're trying the 500L and its SUV-inspired cross guise. That's a confection that Fiat hopes will appeal to buyers in the Duke and Capture style small crossover segment who are not already convinced by the 500X model we mentioned earlier. A properly dressed up Fiat 500X is probably going to cost you the best part of £20,000. A 500L Cross, in contrast, offers much the same kind of style at prices starting from just over £18,000, and that could be significant. If, having considered all of that, you conclude that it is a 500L that you really want, then you're going to need to know just how generous Fiat's been with the standard spec. So let's take a look at that now. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for buyers of the urban and the wagon variants, the range gets going with Popstar trim, and that comes with most of the basics that you want. So things like air conditioning, powered mirrors and a height adjustable driver's seat, and a few things that you might not expect from entry-level spec, things like cruise control, 16-inch alloy wheels and smart techno leather trim for the multifunction steering wheel. The provided 5-inch Uconnect infotainment center dash colour touchscreen that doesn't unfortunately incorporate a DAB tuner, but it does work with USB and aux-in ports, and it offers Bluetooth for your phone. If on an urban or a wagon variant you stretch up to plusher lounge spec, you're provided with, well, really quite a lot. This is a trim level that you need to get the larger 7-inch Uconnect infotainment system that includes classier HD graphics, a DAB tuner and an extra USB port for rear seat passengers. The other key lounge spec inclusion is the huge 1.5 square metre fixed panoramic glass roof that lightens the cabin, which restricts the headspace for rear occupants. At this level in the range, you also get rear parking sensors, the cargo magic space adjustable height boot floor, front fog lamps, powered rear windows, dual zone climate control, extra chrome exterior trim, rain sensing wipers and headlamps that turn on when the car detects fading light conditions. Here though, as we mentioned earlier, we're trying the top Cross model, which comes with a single bespoke level of spec. The key inclusions are the Traction Plus system with its extra grip options for rough road use, extra ride height and a trekking body kit which gives you the skid plate style bumpers front and rear plus special side mouldings. Larger 17-inch trekking alloy wheels are shod with special mud and snow tyres, and there's height adjustment for the front passenger seat and lumbar adjustment for both front chairs. Otherwise, with the exception of the fixed glass roof, the specification is much as it would be with the more conventional lounge specification that we've already covered. On to options. Now, we mentioned the fixed glass roof earlier. You can add that in if the variant you're considering doesn't have it. Plus, you can add in electric sliding functionality for the sunroof if you want it. We'd also want to look at one of the flex packs. Now, the basic one gives you passenger seat height adjustment, lumbar support for both front chairs, and a third rear bench head restraint. The flex pack 2 that we're trying here adds to that tally with a rear seat armrest and rear seat back tables. And the flex pack 3 completes it by giving front seat folk heated seats. You might also want to add a front armrest, an electrochromatic dipping rear view mirror, a heated windscreen and an extra child view rear mirror so you can keep a better eye on what those little horrors are getting up to in the back. Probably our favourite extra though is the 520 watt 8-channel Beats audio system we've been trying here. If budget restricts you to base pop star trim, you'll be offered most of the extra lounge spec items as options, which might be a good way to go if you like the idea of a well-specified 500L, but you don't want the headroom restricted glass roof that you have to have with the lounge model. What else? Well, there is a city pack that gives you power folding mirrors and a rear view camera, plus rear parking sensors if your chosen variant doesn't have them. A smoking kit is provided if you still have to give that up, and we definitely want to space save a spare wheel. Unfortunately though, Fiat no longer offers the in-car coffee maker that you could have with the original version of this model. Onto aesthetics. Has any 5-seat compact family 5-door ever offered more scope for bio-personalisation than this one? Well, we doubt it. There's a wide range of different metallic colours, and with certain shades it's possible to change the colour of the roof, which is a rather unique option on a small MPV. The bi-colour roof options are either white or, as in this case, matte black, and your chosen shade will also be replicated on the door mirrors. Now, if you haven't gone for this cross variant, you might well also want to upgrade to larger 17-inch alloy wheels, and even if you have, you might want to change the look of the 17-inch rims by adding in different finishes around the spokes, either white, black, black diamond, matte black or glossy black diamond. Red brake calipers are optional too, and a Style Plus pack gives you dark tinted rear windows along with an LED interior light. On to practicalities. Via Fiat supplier Mopar, there are also racks for surfboards, skis and roof boxes. Inside you can add rear window sunshades and seat back protectors, plus coat hooks and tables can be anchored to the head restraints. There's also a useful front seat organiser with multiple pockets and a tablet holder, and you might also want to look at an iPod holder or even a key in your own personal colour. For the boot area, there are various protectors, nets and cargo organisers. If you have pets, you might want to look at things like the removable and washable boot protective tray, a rear bumper luggage protector and a rigid partition net. As for safety, well, there's no driver's knee bag provided, but a 5-star Euro NCAP showing is otherwise fully justified by the standard provision of twin front side and curtain airbags and ESP stability control, along with traction control. The anti-lock brakes are boosted by BAS brake assist to help in emergency stops, and there's also a tyre pressure monitoring system, plus a hill holder clutch that stops the car from rolling backwards when you're pulling away on steep inclines. If you want more, you'll have to tick the box for the optional safety pack, which, along with an electrochromatic dipping rearview mirror, gives you camera-driven safety technology in the form of Fiat's City Brake Control System. Now, this works between 3 and 19 miles an hour and constantly scans the road ahead as you drive in search of potential accident hazards. If one's detected and the system thinks that you might hit it, the brakes will automatically be applied. Automotive running cost efficiency isn't just an issue the car makers have to address, it's something we all have to accept responsibility for, if only to keep monthly fuel costs within reasonable bounds. There isn't, after all, much point in a team of engineers toiling for years to produce a family car with light bodywork and a frugal range of power plants if end users are simply going to thrash about the end result. Now, you're not going to be very tempted to do that in a 500L, it simply isn't that kind of car. But you can do your bit on the frugality side with this model thanks to the clever EcoDrive Live system that's built into the centre dash infotainment screen on most variants. Now, Fiat says it's a bit like having a personal trainer on board. This electronic coach isn't looking to fight the flab, but instead is looking to trim your figures rather than your figure, specifically those for fuel and CO2 efficiency. Earlier versions of the EcoDrive system did this by monitoring your driving style and then producing a report that you had to download onto a USB stick and then view on your home PC, and that was all a bit nerdish. Here it's all done with live assistance, analysing your driving in real time and making suggestions instantly displayed on the dash-mounted Uconnect infotainment screen. Your progress is graded in 4 areas: acceleration, deceleration, speed and shifting. And there's a little leafy tree graphic and a continually updated current trip index score to show you how effective your efforts toward frugality have been. Used properly, Fiat reckons that using EcoDrive Live proactively could improve this 500L model's efficiency returns by up to 16%, although it's difficult to understand how they could have accurately arrived at that figure. There's also the opportunity to share your eco-driving performance figures on the Uconnect website, so you can see how you stack up against other 500L drivers. If you do buy this car and you actually do that, though, we'd suggest you really need to get out a bit more. Even if perhaps understandably you're tempted to completely ignore the rather worthy EcoDrive setup and simply use your right foot and half an ounce of common sense to regulate economy, we can't imagine that 500L motoring is ever going to cost you very much. The 1.3 litre 95 bhp multi-jet diesel variant that tends to be quite popular manages 68.9 mpg on the combined cycle and puts out 107 grams per kilometre of CO2. Those are figures you can further improve to 72.4 mpg and 104 grams per kilometre if you opt to pair that engine with the optional dual-logic automatic gearbox. Here we're trying the alternative 1.6 litre 120 bhp multi-jet diesel, which manages 67.3 mpg and 112 grams per kilometre of CO2. The two petrol alternatives are, of course, way behind those kind of figures, with 1.4 litre 95 bhp unit delivering figures that remind us just how inefficient small car engines used to be: 46.3 mpg on the combined cycle and 143 grams per kilometre of CO2. In 1.4 litre 120 bhp T-Jet turbo form, the returns are much different: 42.2 mpg and 155 grams per kilometre. What else? Well, there's a smart fuel system that does away with the fuel cap and makes it impossible to put petrol into a diesel car or vice versa. And servicing, well, that will be needed on petrol units every 18,000 miles or every 12 months, depending on which comes around soonest. You can stretch that out to 21,000 miles if you opt for one of the diesels. That servicing needn't be too costly, as Fiat parts are relatively cheap. And the brand also offers fixed price servicing plans that take care of all service charges, labour and replacement fluids. You can pick from durations that span from 1 to 5 years, with corresponding mileages from 9,000 to 45,000 miles. On to residual values. Don't get your hopes up too much here. Present predictions see this car retaining 31 to 33% of its original value after 3 years or 60,000 miles. What else? Well, every model in the range is covered by a 3-year unlimited mileage warranty, and there's 36 months of breakdown cover included as well. Should you have a problem on a journey, you can use the Uconnect infotainment system to contact roadside assistance, and the same setup can also be used to book routine services too. As for insurance, well, petrol people will be looking at either Group 10 for the base 1.4 or Group 15 for the 1.4 T-Jet. The 1.3 diesel is rated at Group 10, but if you go for the 1.6 litre diesel, that jumps right up to Group 20. Now, go for this cross model, and presumably because of the safety benefits of the extra traction, those figures drop by 1 grouping level in each case. Even more 500, even more convenient, even more technology. Well, that, according to Fiat, is what's on offer with this much improved 500L. Now, it won't stem the stampede away from small people carriers into SUVs, but it may well carve out a very useful niche for itself. It probably helps Fiat's cause that the 500L is so quirky looking. In our opinion though, the unusual aesthetics only start to work in its favour when you pay plenty to dress them up with the kind of upmarket trim we have here. Otherwise, the retro, stretched 500 model styling can just look rather odd. Get that right though, and you might really like the way that fashionable thinking has been applied from a practical perspective here. As for issues, well, in terms of fit, finish and cabin quality, other rivals still do it better, although this improved model does now have a bit more showroom sheen. The drive dynamics remain pretty limiting, even by modest class standards, but that's not something we're minded to criticise to any great extent. I mean, horses for courses and all that. We are though a little disappointed that Fiat didn't take the opportunity to improve refinement a little as part of this mid-term update. Still, if the character of this car appeals, there's lots else to like. Unlike small MPV rivals, Fiat cleverly broadened this model's appeal with 7-seat and SUV-orientated derivatives, plus almost endless scope for personalisation. And across the range, running cost efficiency, decent media connectivity and strong equipment levels are all attributes that potential buyers will appreciate. In summary, what we have here, a little confusingly, is a little MPV that doesn't feel especially little, nor in some ways does it feel especially like an MPV. Now, Fiat thinks that's a good thing, here delivering us a compact, versatile and very individual contender able to take care of people and baggage carrying chores with a practical dash of Italian flair. For them, it's the 500 all grown up. And it's a sensible family car you could really feel good about.